Hey there, everybody. Okay, so what we're going to do here is we are going to turn our data, which is now in a table, which is great, by the way. We're going to turn it into some graphs. Let me get this caught up. It looks like I'm going to change these two percentages like we did before. Maybe change these two percentages as well. Okay. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a bar graph off of this data. We could do it as a pie chart, but based on what we all talked about in class, it seemed you liked bar graphs better as a choice for the graphical representation of something like this than a pie. And I'm tempted to agree with you, honestly. I think I like bar graphs, generally speaking, better than a bar graph for something like this. We can look at it both ways if you want to. So we're gonna take a look at this right now. The easiest way to create bar graphs in Excel is just grab the data that you want to see. So what I'm going to grab, as I mentioned in the last video, the percentages and not the counts. And the reason is because, like I said in the last video, the counts in the recycled deck are so much higher than the fresh deck counts, and that's because we're getting more kind of use, if you will, out of the recycled versus the fresh deck. Okay, so I'm going to use the percentages, which are they're all out of 100 versus being out of different size totals. Okay, so I highlighted them. Don't grab the sums. You don't want to graph that. That's just checking to make sure these add to 100. And then once you do that, go up to Insert, and then find the bar graph column or bar chart choice right here. And then, honestly, the easiest one to use is usually the first one they offer you, which is right here. Boom. And there it is, right there. You're technically done, except, of course, we're not, because generally speaking, the way Excel gives you a bar chart is not clear to somebody who's reading it what you're looking at. So there's a couple things that I don't like about this. First of all, it's chart title. What is this chart actually showing? So if I look down here and I see bars, and I'm like, okay, so I see orange looks like it's the recycled deck. As I hover over the orange, it shows recycled deck, and if I hover over blue, it says fresh deck. Yay! And then I look down here and I see, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4. Well, that's not right. That shouldn't be 1, 2, 3, 4. That should be 2, 3, 4, 5. So how do you change that? So we're going to go into the guts of this chart. We're going to right click on the chart, and then we're going to go to Select Data. And this is something we don't do very often in class. You'll learn it more in your later stat classes. And then you see how it says horizontal category axis labels? We're going to edit those. We don't want those to be 1, 2, 3, 4. We want those when you hit edit and then it asks for an axis label range. You're going to come over here and you're going to select 2, 3, 4, 5. And I don't know if you noticed, as soon as you do that, 2, 3, 4, 5 show up down at the bottom here. Hit OK. Hit OK again, and now we're actually looking at the correct numbers. And I think they're too small. So I'm going to left click on them. I'm going to make them larger so I can see them better. I'm going to make them bold. That is much better. That is much better. Okay. Now, again, I want these charts to speak for themselves. Personally, I like it when they speak for themselves. And this doesn't tell me anything. 2 what? 3 what? 4 what? 5 what? I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to put an axis title. Primary horizontal. And now it shows up down here, axis title. I'm going to double click in there, and I'm going to change this to number of cards drawn until we got a repeated suit. It's a little bit wordy. You don't have to use the exact same words I do. I'm also going to make it bold. I'm going to increase the font a little tiny bit. I kind of like this. I kind of like this. You know what I don't like? I don't like this legend being down here. I'm going to move that up to maybe up to here and make it a little bit bigger. That way people know what the orange and the blue mean. Oh, I like that. That's good so far. We're getting there. We're getting there. I think this is starting to look pretty good. I'm going to move this down a little bit. Yeah, I kind of like this. This is good. Maybe move this down a little tiny bit. Okay. I'm liking the way this is looking. Okay. So far so good. I definitely think chart title needs to be explained a little bit better. Chart title, I'm going to double click on that and call it Analyzing Fresh Decks. No, we shouldn't say that. How should we title this? Is there a difference between using a full deck or a partial deck. Something like that. I think that probably explains, I mean, you can explain it more, but that's what we're really trying to figure out. We're trying to see if there actually is a difference, whether or not you, whether you use an entire deck of cards versus just the partial remainder deck. So I think that's a good enough title for, at least for our purposes. You can name it something else if you don't think that's clear enough. I think this is looking pretty good. I mean, the axis starts at 0. I can live with that. I like that a whole lot, actually. It goes up to 40, which again I can live with. I see 2, I see 3, I see 4, I see 5. I'm going to show you a couple other changes you can make on this bar graph. I'm going to let you decide if you want to do it or not. You see how these bars don't touch each other? You can adjust that by right-clicking on one of the bars, and then going to Format Data Series, and you can change things like the overlap of the bars. You can set the overlap to 0. You can set the overlap to negative, which puts them apart from each other. You can do that. Okay, I like to set it at 0. This is my personal opinion, just because that makes them butt right up next to each other. Gap width is something you can choose to mess with if you want. That just changes the width of the bars, the gap between the bars. So the larger the gap, the more white space there is between. You can actually go down to 0 and they all I think that's a headache to look at. So I like, you can mess with this until you kind of like it. I think that's not a bad width right there. That's something you can do. You can choose, if you want to, you can choose to do that. You don't have to. Something else you can do, and the older I get, the more I'm doing this, I'm actually right-clicking and adding data labels to my bars. And I'm going to tell you why I do that in a second. I'm going to add them to all of them. Add data labels, okay, and make them bold. And you know what? I'm feeling saucy. I'm going to make that font actually match the bar color. Yeah, I'll make that match the orange color. Is that close? It's a little darker, maybe like that color right there. Because then what's cool is you can actually delete that axis. You don't need that axis at all if you put the numbers right on top of the bars. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. And now what's cool is if you hold down your F9 button, the experiment will continue to replicate while we sit here. And every time it replicates, these bars over here update as we go, which is totally slick. Like the bars are actually, not much because we've already got a ton of trials in, but your experiment's actually replicating as we go in the graph, which is pretty slick if you think about it. So this is one way to get a graphical representation of what you're actually seeing. Now, I want to give you one other option. I use another. This is by and large 99% of the time I use exactly this this method right here. But sometimes, and this is not a time where I generally would use it, but sometimes I will use these three-dimensional bar graphs. Okay, so take a look at this one. Okay, it makes it a little more interesting. You have to do a little bit more formatting. But I tend to use these if I have multiple groups, not just two like this, but a whole bunch of things together. Sometimes a 3D graph looks a little bit more clear. Generally speaking, I like to stick with a 2D graph. That's just my opinion. But if you like the 3D graph more, by all means, go ahead and change it to 3D. You just have to, when you do that, just realize you're going to have to adjust some stuff, like fonts get cut off, and you might want to move some of these labels up and down and make them more easy to read. So just something to think about if you choose that route. Okay? So now your job is to do the exact same thing, make it nice and clear for this data set over here. All right? All right. We'll see you on the next question.